So I'm going to talk about Herodotus. Let's go back. This is before the Roman Empire. This is back in classical Greece. Herodotus was a well-known historian of the time. He became one of the most read historian class texts in ancient schools later on. What does he tell us about? Well, there's certain amazing things happened during the Persian War. One thing was this really incredible defense of the Temple of Delphi, which is considered the center of the universe and one of the holiest sites. It's kind of the Greek equivalent of the Jerusalem temple, the closest thing they had to. And this is Delphi. This is a picture of the ruins of Delphi today. And so what happened at Delphi is the Persians were going to assault and capture Delphi, the holiest city of the Greeks. You know, this is the biggest embarrassing thing that could happen. But they couldn't take it because you know why? Because Delphi, the gods defended Delphi. There's literally the armor and armaments that were dedicated to the temple got up of themselves and walked out and fought the Persians. And there was also lightning bolts came down and struck them, and cliffs miraculously started collapsing and crushing the troops as they tried to get up. And so Delphi was preserved. Moving on, another miracle that occurred during this time is the Persians did one awful, blasphemous, horrible thing, is they burned this tree, supposedly. They burned this tree, which is the sacred olive tree in front of the temple, the Parthenon in Athens. So this sacred tree, they burned it, and so they destroyed this holy tree, and suddenly it miraculously started regrowing and grew a new shoot, brand new shoot, an arm's length in one day, just miraculously. And also then a horse gave birth to a rabbit. It was one of the prodigies that occurred at this time. And then there was a whole town, a whole village witnessed a mass resurrection of cooked fish. That's a whole town. That's a lot of witnesses. I'm sure there was more than 500 witnesses, so that's like better attested than Jesus' resurrection. These are the statues of Memnon in Egypt. They've been corroded by history. They used to be much more beautiful sculptures than these, but acid rain and things have destroyed them. But the interesting thing about these is these were miraculous statues. Because, one thing to note is the pagan statues could also weep and bleed just like the Christian saint statues can, so clearly the pagan gods are just as powerful as the Christian god. So there was a lot of weeping and bleeding and moaning statues and statues that could speak and so on. There were lots of these. And these were among the singing and moaning statues. They would actually hum and sing and do cool things like that. And it was the cool thing to do would be to go here, hear the statues moan, and then pay for a really expensive inscription boasting that you did. This is an inscription at the statues of Memnon attesting to the existence of this miracle. And this is a couple of guys, officers with the legion, with the Thundering Legion, the 12th Legion. Now they put on there, Audimus Memnonem, we heard Memnon. This is a first-hand eyewitness document. The autograph, it's not a copy of a copy. It's physical evidence. We can absolutely date it without question to when it was done. Not only did they attest to the miracle as eyewitnesses, but they even dated it to the hour. They have the 3rd hour on that particular date in that particular year. Now, can you imagine if we had that for like the resurrection of Jesus? No, we don't. Not at all. And here's another example of the sort of first-person autograph physical evidence of miracles. This is an inscription at the Asclepieion at Epidaurus in Greece. This is a famous place where it was kind of like a hospital/healing temple, and it was famous for a long time. And so over hundreds of years, people who went there and received miraculous healings would commission inscriptions honoring the god and honoring and boasting of the great miracle that was done for them. And there are hundreds of these inscriptions, and this is just one of them. And it reads as follows. Euhippus had had a spearhead stuck in his jaw for 6 years. As he was sleeping in the temple, the god came and extracted the spearhead and placed it in his hands. When day came, Euhippus departed cured, and he held the spearhead in his hands. Josephus was born in 37 AD. He wrote around 75 AD about the Jewish war. It's important to note that he's writing just 10 years after the fact, after the events he claims to be relating that I'm going to talk about in a moment. Just 10 years later, so this is much closer to the events than the Gospels are to the events they claim to be reporting. And this is Josephus. This is like a sober, secular-ish historian. One of the best historians of the ancient world, as Christians will tell you. And what does he say? Well, he says, among things that happened, these omens that occurred right before the war that were portending the doom of the Jews, was that at midnight, the temple square and the altar were lit up as bright as day, like there was some vast holy light lit up the entire Jerusalem temple in the middle of the night. And in the middle of the temple square, a cow gave birth to a lamb, because you know when that happens, when a cow gives birth to a lamb, you know God's telling you you're screwed, right? And then the temple doors, the main temple doors were so huge, these giant bronze doors required 20 men to open and close. They were just these vast, impressive doors. But what they did is of themselves, with no one touching them, they unbolted themselves and opened themselves right in front of the awed temple guards, indicating, of course, that God had left the temple and was abandoning the Jews. So let's talk about Christians. I've given you an example from ancient Greeks, from ancient Romans, from a Jewish historian. So, let's be fair, let's be a diversity-conscious critic and bring the Christians back into it. So here's an example of, in the 2nd century, the Christians wrote a lot of books, by the way, more than the Bible. The book of Acts in the Bible is just the one they chose to put in the Bible. There were actually several other books of Acts representing the acts of particular disciples and so forth. And this is from the Acts of John. And there's this interesting story where, St. John, the disciple John, is traveling with his companions, some other disciples, and they come to an inn, and they're staying in the inn, and they're sleeping in the inn, and the bed bugs are just biting the crap out of them. It's horrible, and John's extremely annoyed, and so they're biting all of them, and so he commands the bed bugs in his bunk, and like an army officer, and he commands them to go stand in the corner and leave him alone, and all the bugs dutifully march in ranks, just like legions, and march into the corner and sit there at attention, just like the soldiers would, and stayed there all night, and John slept quite fine. He didn't do this for his colleagues, by the way, so they got continually bitten by the bed bugs. But and then after all of that, when the morning was done and he slept well, and except his friends didn't have such a great night. But after that, he ordered the bed bugs back into the bed, and they marched back in. Now, what I find the interesting thing about this is he put the bugs back in the damn bed. What a fucking dick. Anyway. And then we have a similar thing. We have the Acts of Peter. I won't tell the stories, but I'll just summarize the things that happened. I mean, this is one of the most fantastic books of Acts that we have. I mean, there's flying wizards. There's talking dogs. There's another cooked fish that's resurrected, because Peter could only do the one, apparently. And a Roman senator converts to Christ, and right in front of everybody. And all of this is in the middle of Rome itself, the capital of the empire, before huge crowds. This is St. Genevieve. She died in 510 AD, and the life about her, the story of her life, was written only 10 years later. And like the Gospels, it was written by an anonymous monk, who, of course, surely must have known everything about her. And this also had, tree monsters that would spring out of trees and fight in great battles for hours. There were ship levitations. There were ships that were sinking, and she actually magically levitated entire fleets of ships. Exorcisms of demons, that's stock stuff. Conjurations. She could conjure water and oil from nothing. Better than Jesus, I guess. Jesus had to start with something to conjure, but she could conjure it from thin air. Healings, of course. She particularly was good at healing the blind and the lame. And the holy hexes. This is the coolest thing. People who would steal things from her, like her comb and stuff, would go blind. That's how awesome she was.